morning. How are we today? This is Monday, another Monday. I'm very excited as always. As you know, Monday we come here with the whole team and we do our 8 a.m. Mentorship Academy call, which runs from now until about 8:30. Today it'll be slightly over because we started slightly late, but we do 30 minutes, strictly 30 minutes, and we can tell from our live signal. And I want to take this opportunity to welcome all of you to another session, another Monday. Thank God for Monday. Glad to welcome back Auntie Sylvia. She's in the background, but we always welcome her back. She had to take time off to go bury her beloved mother-in-law, who had clocked 97. I mean, it's not a joke in this day and age to see somebody become a non-Nigerian. Almost at least octogenarian, but nonagenarian. That's quite rare. And then not only that, she was literally going to be 98 by September. So it's an amazing thing, even though, yes, we absolutely miss and, mourn the loss of that individual, but we also celebrate the fact that God, by his grace, allowed her to live that long and probably see her 5th generation of children, which is just amazing. Anyway, every day we're here, Monday to Friday. Mondays I come through with this program. Tuesdays we have Dr. Sunshine Sylvia with her Mindset Change program. Wednesday is the Mompreneurs. Thursday we have Dr. Nelly with her Prosperity for Your Soul. And Friday we have the New Image presentations. And so we come every time. So make a date, lock the details, capture the links, and you'll always be able to catch it. Remember, when we go live on Facebook or any of these platforms, there's always a signal there for you to follow. So today we are picking it up and continuing on this topic here, which is bootstrapping. And we've been doing the bootstrapping topic for a while. This particular one is how to scale your business. We're still doing the 4th part of bootstrapping. And we're learning about sources of financing SMEs in Zambia today. This is a song which is very popular among many people, that there isn't enough financing in Zambia. So take a pen and paper, take note, because I'm about to lay them out for you. But there are factors, of course, which cannot be ignored when we're looking at such a topic. So now the number one excuse, like I said, given by many people as to why businesses fail in Zambia is that they cannot access financing. Now, on the surface, that sounds legitimate, but I'll break it down further. So whilst there is some truth to this, the factors are more complex than meets the eye. According to research carried out by financial expert Trevor Hambai of Development Finance Associates, from a survey carried out among SMEs, 91%, imagine that, 91% failed due to delayed payment and inability to access short-term credit. In other words, things like a letter of credit, invoice discounting, overdraft facilities, and the like. And I'll break those down just now. 64% due to price competitiveness or unsustainably low margins, and then 37% due to undercapitalization, and 8% due to poor management and corporate governance. So let's break this down a bit before I get into the money. And I think this is like very eye-opening. So 91% failed due to delayed payment and inability to access short-term credit. What does that mean? That means for a lot of businesses, they didn't do their homework when it comes to their cash flow. The number one reason many businesses fail to operate is because of the inability to manage cash flow. What is cash flow, my friends? Cash flow is the interaction of income and expenses over time, specifically income. So money coming in, expenses being paid when they fall due. And when you're running a full-fledged business, you have what we call permanent standing expenses, like your operations and of course your salaries and all that's required to make your business tick, whether it's fuel, internet, phones, electricity, whatever it is. There is something that must be paid for all the time, whether you do business or you don't. As soon as you open your business, you pay these things, licensing fees, whatever. So this delayed payment thing is a huge problem. And so with this problem, there's also what we call short-term credit. So short-term credit is where, for example, overdraft facilities are really helpful, because what do? They help bridge between payments. So if you're running a farm, usually your payments only come after 6 months or something, because that's when you're harvesting and making making sales, unless you're doing short-term, crops, tomatoes and the like. But even those are very subject to whether there's money coming in or not, and operations in between seasons. So this is a very critical issue. We'll talk about that. So price competitiveness and unsustainably low margins. It's not, you don't always just wake up and say, hey, I'm going to put my price lower than whoever the big competitor is. That's not safe for your business. You have to really do your math and determine. I can tell you a lot of people don't really do their math properly. They don't really work out the cash flow properly. And so inevitably they end up in problems because they didn't do their calculations. How much are you really making? Many times people tend to calculate what we call the immediate costs or immediate inputs, but ignore completely the overheads, which actually make part of your business. You look at, I put in 50,000 kwacha, brought stock worth 50, sold it for 70, I've made 20p. Have you really made 20p? Have you factored in marketing? Have you factored in storage, transportation, and all the other costs that are not so obvious, but are a cost nonetheless? So this is where, again, unsustainably low margins becomes the reason. And remember, if you're going to keep an item and it stays way longer than you what I would call profitably keep it, that becomes a liability and actually messes you up. So that's another reason. Then he also said that 37% due to undercapitalization. There are people who go to borrow, well and good, but what they do is they borrow from people like Zambia. Well, I wouldn't even recommend going to any of these short-term, what I call killer lenders. There are these killer lenders, we call them month-end pay, lenders, the money lenders. The problem with money lenders, their rates are super high, number one. Number two, their business model for a normal business are completely unsustainable. You cannot manage. And then thirdly, a number of them will actually deduct the cost of administration, as they call it, as you borrow. So I'll give you a very good example. I mean, we can name them because they're there. Zamcash, when you go to borrow Zamcash, you borrow a 500 kwacha, they'll pay you 375 because they claim 125 goes towards admin. That's, for me, that's robbery. But they have a target audience because they are targeting, salaried workers. If you're running a business, don't even borrow like that, because already off the cuff, you're paying already what, 20% or some crazy figure like that. It doesn't even make sense. How are you going to do your business at 125? Let me see. Maybe it's not even 20%. It's even probably more than that. For me, it's ridiculous. It's 25%. That's right. So 25%. You haven't even borrowed. Sorry, let me check. Anyway, 50,000 kwacha, and then they're going to take 12,500 as administration, and then leave you with 37,500. Are you serious? How are you going to run a business with 37,500 when you needed 50,000? So do you see how that's already a minus? And then they're still going to charge you whatever the figure they're charging, 10% or 15% per month. They'll still charge you and keep it under the statutory Bank of Zambia limit, which I think is 42% or 45%, whatever it is, I don't know. But either way, one great mentor once told me that if you're borrowing more than 15% per annum, it's unsustainable for a brick and mortar business. Couldn't agree more. More than 15% per annum is unsustainable for a brick and mortar business. So what these guys do is they'll charge you 15%, they'll charge you 30% or whatever it is, but in the period borrowed, which is usually 2 months or 3 months. It's ridiculous. Don't you go for such money. That's going to cause undercapitalization. I am telling you, as a bona fide person that's been in business for decades now, to not borrow at such rates. You are setting yourself up for total failure. That's why there's so many defaults in the country right now, because those rates are unreal. The only people who can pay those kind of rates are salaried workers. If you're running a legitimate business, your best bet is still the bank. The challenge, I agree, is how to borrow from the bank, because they make it so difficult. There's a reason they do that. We'll get to that. Then 8% due to poor management and corporate governance. I won't go into that. Now let's go into, boy, here we are frozen again. Oh boy. Okay. Ah, man. Today's just one of those days. Huh? All right, back to another internet.
We can still hear you. You can go ahead.
But I noticed okay, I'm good. Okay, let me continue. It had frozen. So seeing the first two items I mentioned are, connected to financing, it then becomes imperative that as a business is growing, the issue of financing must take priority. Okay, you will realize that even though bootstrapping can and does work, there is a level where that just won't cut it anymore. You bootstrap up to a certain point, and then that doesn't work anymore. So there's a level where, so like I said, and the need for some form of financing becomes inevitable. So I will now outline very quickly available sources and then cover in broad strokes the most used options here in Zambia. So I'm not going to talk about the US or the UK where things are far, far different from here. Let's talk about what's going on the ground. So there are traditional financing options that include loans, equity finance, grants, invoice discounting, corporate bond, lease finance, supplier credit, equity mortgage release, SME collaboration and clustering, pre-order finance, which is import and export, letter of credit, and venture capital. So in Zambia, I will use what is most sustainable and likely. These are all financing options, but not as easily available in Zambia. So the first one, which is the most obvious, which everybody avoids, is personal savings, family, friends, and relatives. So what does that mean? As you already may be aware, this is part of a series on bootstrapping and is immensely detailed in content. So in a nutshell, bootstrapping is the concept of building a business from scratch using available personal resources, including money, time, effort, skill, networks, available assets, and the like, without borrowing from traditional lending institutions or getting formal financing. And this is why your savings, friends, and family become very cardinal. And what is the secret to getting friends and family to lend you money? Trustworthiness. That's the answer. Trustworthiness. My question to you is, are you trustworthy? What I discover for most people is they're not, unfortunately. And so as a result, this is the reason why many of them will not see themselves do so well. So if you are trustworthy, if you are one of those that makes it a point to pay on time and be a person of your word, you will see that over time you build massive trust capital and people will be happy to lend you. So remember, if you're trustworthy, this can be a great source of financing the business fairly well. Now, of course, that still has a limit to where it can go to, but it's a very effective way to finance your business. Then we've got lease finance, okay? This type of financing is one where a lender or leaser finances a business, thereafter known as a leasee, but retains ownership of equipment or assets purchased by the lessee for the agreed period and makes payment until they clear the loan, after which the ownership of the asset transfers to the lessee. This is a great way to finance businesses because the very equipment or assets purchased are typically the collateral. Okay, typically leasing tends to work as a partnership between the vendors of equipment and or vehicles, which are the assets, insurance companies, and the banks or lenders. So this method is very effective depending which field you're in and your level of reputation, your quality of work, your trustworthiness, your social capital. This method is extremely effective. So what does that mean? That means when you have a business and you need to purchase equipment, they will use the equipment as collateral. But remember, that means you have to have met certain basic requirements, including governance, because no one is going to do an asset financing where there's no proper, board of directors, governance structures, existing premises. There's a bunch of things that these people need to see on the ground before they lend you the money and before they go into this kind of existence. You have to even demonstrate from the bank that you've actually been earning money. This is one of the most difficult things for a lot of businesses to do, especially small enterprises. Medium, they're not so bad, but micro and small enterprises, it's a non-starter because most of them will probably be using mobile money for transactions. They don't really use their banks. So the track record of income is very, very paltry to non-existent. So what you want to do, you want a situation where you set up in such a manner that you can demonstrate that you're making money consistently and they can see that that money is being made. That's a very critical issue that many, many businesses fail to do. So you don't have a track record, you don't have a history, you don't have any kind of systems in place, you don't have, checks and balances, and that makes you what they call in banking high risk. High risk. So they are not going to lend you. These guys actually have a system, they have a breakdown, they have a list of items which they check, and for every check on that box, it's more likely you'll be lent money. But if these things are missing, that becomes problematic. So they are usually a bit, what's the word? They are a bit reserved when it comes to lending money to businesses that are not able to put in place all these basics. And that's where admin, governance, in fact, these days there's a whole thing running now, they call it ESG. So environmental, social, and governance. These three are very critical. Of course, that is big for bigger companies that are medium to large enterprises, but medium and large enterprises, correct. But the small businesses, maybe they isn't so important. Environmental, the social issues, but governance still plays a role. Because if you don't have the right governance, it's very difficult to be lent money. Then we go to supplier credit. So that's the first one, and that's the most powerful. In fact, let me just emphasize something else here. On that first one, that's where even the banks fall. So if you want to borrow from the banks, you need to make sure that all the things I outlined just a few minutes ago have to be present. Primarily the basics: registered, tax clearance, compliant with all rules. So whether it's NAPSA or NEMA, or what's the other one? Workers' compensation, and your taxes as well are paid on time, all that jazz. And then board of governors, and everything else connected to that. Structure, premises, goods, proof of business, proof of income earning, which is your bank statements and things that with proper money going in and out, all those things. And then in some instances, even audited books of account. That one is huge. I'll get back to that. So supplier credit. Now, this is perhaps one of the best ways of obtaining finance, as this typically involves suppliers extending credit for an agreed period of time. Usually it could be anywhere from 14 to 60 days. And this, though, only works where good reputation and trust have been in existence. So many may not realize this, but the large-scale companies like supermarkets in Zambia work using credit extended by micro and small enterprises through their invoicing system, where suppliers are typically paid between 14 and 30 days. So for example, ShopRite, Pick and Pay, Checkers, Choppies, and the like. They operate using this. This is very, very effective for them. Okay, this gives enough working capital for the larger entities to balance their cash flows and meet operational costs using interest-free credit. So that's the advantage of this. The same also works for agents and vendors who have good working relationships with manufacturers or service providers, where consistency in sales is seen. Suppliers are happy to increase the credit extended, which then makes it easier for the vendor or agent to thrive better. So this is why you don't want to be one of those business people who, when you get credit, you take longer to pay, because that will affect you. Even if they understand that, yes, you were not paid or whatever, it's still going to affect you. It's going to hamper your ability to grow your business, because they will be like, you know what, we lent him 10,000 worth of stock. He was supposed to pay it in 14 days. It took him 3 months. So at that level, they will not go beyond the 10,000. You see what I mean? They will just not go beyond the 10,000 because they realize you aren't faithful. That's the problem. I mean, It doesn't matter what the problem is, what the situation is, they're still not going to give you the money because you're not faithful. Simple. So that's the reason why you need to make sure. I think people like Auntie Sylvia, who's run a business forever, know and understand the importance of clearing suppliers. You really don't want suppliers not supplying you because that's going to affect your ability to deliver. Exactly. So suppliers must be paid. They're part of your deliverables. They must be paid when their payments fall due, come rain, come shine. Pay them. And then next group after, between suppliers and salaried workers, they kind of all fall in the same thing. Because if workers are not paid on time, there's no morale. If there's no morale, the attitude is wrong. If the attitude is wrong, the culture is wrong. If the culture is wrong, delivery service is bad. If delivery service is bad, the customer's pissed off. If the customer's pissed off, then I'm going to give you money, which is then going to affect you all around again. So that's why you want to make sure that when it comes to salaries, when it comes to suppliers, pay them on time. Pay them on time. And remember, with suppliers, if you pay on time, they give you more stock, which you can then use to do your thing. So it's very important to pay suppliers on time. Internal revenue, which is organic growth. This is not as easy as it sounds. Okay, this is where one uses the power of sales and recapitalization to grow the business. Typically, this tends to work better in businesses that utilize services more than stock, because stock is a tricky one. The process begins with the acquisition of orders for which deposits are paid, and then that money finances the final product. The key then lies in increasing the volume turnover so that the capital increases. When coupled with good corporate governance and financial discipline, many companies have been able to achieve organic growth with zero financing from outside. Okay. However, I must emphasize that this scenario is unique to a limited sector of the entrepreneurial landscape and is not true of most. The need, well, what am I saying now? Okay, in view of the challenges of financing today, however, the need to think outside the box and find innovative ways to self-finance are critical, especially using this model. Okay, so what was the model again? The model is internal revenue or organic growth based off the ability to get payments in advance. Getting payments in advance and then delivering. But do you realize that most people will not pay in advance unless they are very certain of your capacity to work? So many businesses will do maybe half now, half on delivery. That's still very good because that gives you the capital to work with. So the obvious answer is that if you increase the number of orders, you increase the capacity to deliver. That's usually where the problem is. That means you bring in maybe more skilled workers, bring in more stock or whatever it is. But this deposit that people pay, if you've done your homework properly, if you've done your numbers properly, it should give you the ability to pay for almost everything needed to do the job. And then all that's left is just that balance. When it comes, it's the one that helps you to pay off what's there. Now, what's the danger to that? Having late payments, especially with government, because they're the ones who are notorious for paying not on time. And that can be so frustrating. But I'm aware that the current government has been really working to try and kind of minimize that. So people who are now doing business with government in this era, there's been a lot of work to try and pay on time. But government is still government. They still delay a lot of payments. And so if you don't have the capacity to handle that credit, you will tank. And this is why, for me, if you've got no capacity to handle credit, don't give it out. It's better not to have the business than to be, chasing a 2 million kwacha deal and then tanking. People have lost properties, people have lost everything because they got a big, nice deal, 5-10 million kwacha deal, and then they've not been paid. I mean, I know a good friend of mine that's still owed 15 years after supplying the Zambia Police Service. I also supplied the Zambia Police Service. So I know I supplied the Army, the Air Force. The Air Force and the Army are very good at paying. Zambia National Service is very good at paying. Prisons, but police, But I'm talking from experience. So it took me 4 years to get my money. In fact, we reached a point where all debt that was sitting with the police was shifted to the Ministry of Finance, and we were now pursuing our final payments from the Ministry of Finance. So to run with credit for 4 or 5 years when you've invested 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 kwacha is not a joke. Imagine if you put your house up as collateral to borrow from the bank because you took the orders, they all saw that, then they lent you money based on that. It's terrible. And a lot of people have lost houses. I mean, look, you don't have to take my word for it. Go right now to any newspaper like Zambia Daily Mail, where they're still doing printing. Check the back page and see how many notices of forfeitures are there. How many properties are being forfeited right now because they failed to pay. So this is a big deal. Then there's shareholder contribution. I'll finish very quickly. This is where the owners of the company contribute equity in the form of actual cash. This may also determine percentage of share contribution. This kind of financing is best because there is no pressure to pay back the money, but instead to allow it to grow. And this is why this type of financing is the best as far as I'm concerned. Why? Because it allows the business to grow. One great mentor of mine was telling me that recently he had to borrow almost $1 million kwacha, and it came from different individuals who were very interested in the business and believed in it. And so they lent that money, which was then used to cover up a lot of accumulated debt that had come to the business to the tune of almost 500,000 kwacha. But they were able to pay all of that, salaries, whatever, based on this capital injection, which then will help the business now move forward. So it's a very interesting model. For me, it's the best. But do you know how people give you money like this? Because you have a rock solid reputation. You're not one of those characters who they lend you money and then you go and mess it up. They know that these are the people who will do the business. You know, it's the same reason why when you go to vie for certain businesses with certain organizations, some of these organization CEOs will actually walk down with you to come and look at the kind of car you're driving. And that usually is used as a form of determining if you have the capacity, or if they give you the business, you go and buy your Hilux instead of doing the business. I've had so many people I know do that, which is a very silly thing to do. Right? Like really, it's one of the most silly things to do, because you literally are eating your profit before you, it's like eating your seed before you plant it. Yeah. So there's a lot of people who got very good business in the construction space, paid very good deposits to start running. Of course, they had to borrow from the bank using collateral, but they still went and bought the Hiluxes. I mean, something about people buying Hiluxes. I don't know if it's this wish. So they go buy the Hiluxes, and then what happens? Usually the biggest problem is government delays to pay. That's the number one problem. And because of that, what happens? You find your whole business comes to a standstill. You can't deliver. Payments are late. In fact, in this case, they paid you a deposit, and they're expecting you to push the job to a certain level. You can't even push it because of your bloody Hilux. You know what I mean? And finally, invoice discounting. This is a really good model. This is where once orders have been secured and the local purchase order exists, financing is offered to fulfill the order, and payments are then made to the financer once client pays. And what happens is that money, when it goes to the financer, they take their bit and then pay you the balance. In a good system where things work, it's powerful. It's a powerful model, it works. But in a broken system like ours in this country, it's very risky, because we have a lot of people who've not been paid on time. The private sector is even better, but unfortunately, even the private sector has struggled. KCM owes, I think, I don't even know what figures they owe. They owe some mad figures. I mean, recently, CEC, confiscated massive amounts of equipment from KCM because they were owed, what, $11 million, I think, in unpaid power. So imagine a company like KCM. I've got my former pastor. He runs a very powerful equipment, earth-moving equipment business, and he supplies to these mines. KCM owe him on average 5-6 million kwacha at any given time. And right now, they're not paid for months. They had to pull all their equipment to take it elsewhere. So imagine if they were on the invoice discounting. What happens? You lose everything, because those people will then sue you and then come and grab all the equipment because it's collateral. So this is where, again, the challenge of what we're going through is a serious one. And we need to realize that the country right now and the situation isn't exactly that great. So even for big private sector, players, there is a problem with supplier payment. So KCM is still going through whatever issues, sorting that out, and they have suppliers that have not paid for months on end, and that is very bad for business. So this is why I say again that when you do invoice discounting, make sure you get it where you know for sure that you will be paid according to the invoices. So do a bit of due diligence, find out these organizations. Normally, like banks and some of these corporations are very faithful. They do pay on time without fail. A number of quasi-government organizations are also very faithful. Zambia Revenue Authority, Bank of Zambia, National Assembly, and some of the quasi-government organizations, as far as I know, have been very consistent in paying. If they tell you 14 days is 14 days, 21 days is 21 days, that kind of thing. But some of them are really bad. You start becoming an expert, money chaser. One good friend of mine told me it's better to chase payments than to have no business. I suppose, but not if you are borrowing, like we talked about. So if you are borrowing, you don't want to be chasing payments. In fact, it's better not to borrow. It's better not to have the business than have the business, and then they end up taking all your property, taking all the collateral you put as security for the loan, because that's very distressing. On that note, guys, thank you so much. Next week when I come back, because on Wednesday I think Dr. Sunshine will be presenting, I'm not sure. But we'll be looking at the third aspect of scaling business, and that is securing your sales. This is another one that a lot of bootstrapping people don't get. You need to secure your sales. So in that next one, we'll talk about it. Have a great day. God bless you, and see you tomorrow with Sunshine.